Okay, so it looks like the Federal Reserve finally decided to cut interest rates. And on top of that, we may be going in for unfortunately, we may be going in for a recession soon. So we're going to react to some of this stuff that's going on now, starting with Graham Stephan talking about the actual interest rates being cut. And then we'll go right on to why I think we're going to be in a recession very, very soon.
What's up, you guys? It's Graham here, and you better get ready for what just happened. As of a few hours ago, believe it or not, the Federal Reserve just lowered interest rates for the first time since last year, officially marking the end of the most restrictive tightening cycle in history. Yes, you heard that correctly. The money printer is turning back on once again. And that means there's going to be some pretty serious implications across just about everything, from the stock market, the housing market, the national debt, and even the value of the US dollar. So given these shocking new updates and their brand new predictions as of today, let's talk about exactly what just happened, what the Federal Reserve just said, the impact this is about to have on everything money, and then finally, how you could use this information to come out ahead profitable. Because there's a lot going on under the surface that very few people are talking about. Although
I can tell you with interest rates now being cut, money's about to be a whole lot cheaper. So typically the Federal Reserve does this when they need to basically put a jolt in the economy. So we're talking about things like people in the real estate market that have been holding out, waiting for interest rates to go down. Now they're going to start getting into the market to buy houses. You're going to see people borrowing more money, whether it's to improve a business or to throw it in the stock market. That was what was going on in years prior, back when we had the COVID pandemic. So looking forward to seeing how this goes.
Before we start, if you appreciate these breaking news videos like this, it would mean the world to me if you hit the like button or subscribe if you haven't done that already. I know it's stupid to ask for it, but it does help tremendously, and as a thank you for doing that, I will do my best to read and reply to as many of your comments as I can. So thanks so much, and also a big thank you to the Gemini credit card for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Alright, now in terms of
Don't trust it. Don't trust it. Anytime these finance YouTubers, finance creators hype up a credit card or something that has to do with credit, debit, banking, just don't do it. We all know the issue that happened with Yada Bank.
what's about to happen, let's talk about the topic on everybody's minds, and that would be interest rates. Even though our economy is so far overall still healthy and GDP is continuing to grow, Jerome Powell finally admitted that the downside risks are rising, and as a result, he recently said the conditions allow us to proceed carefully as we consider changes to our policy stance. This is completely different from what we saw a few months ago, prior to shockingly low job numbers when the Federal Reserve strongly resisted these rate cuts. Even now, we have inflation creeping back towards 3%, revised job numbers that continue to decline, and a weakening US dollar, leaving people wondering, why all of a sudden is the Federal Reserve cutting rates now? Well, like it or not, it all has to do with one topic that's been grossly underreported, and that would be
Navad is a business travel booking.
Apparently, it would be with Navad, but let's see what Graham has to say.
I mentioned earlier, that's been grossly underreported, and that would be jobs. Like I mentioned earlier, the Federal Reserve is in charge of maintaining policies that promote a healthy labor market, or I guess in other words, an economy that keeps people steadily employed. And as it turns out, a lot of people are falling behind. For instance, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just revised their job numbers down by the largest amount on record, showing a loss of 1 million jobs, more than they originally expected.
And that is happening no matter what sector you're in. We're seeing it in tech, we're seeing it in industry jobs, we're seeing it in the trades even. It's hard out here to find a job nowadays. Like, we are not only in an employer's market right now, but we are in a very, very hard market.
Even said that this was more than 200,000 deeper than economists predicted, and it's worse than the 2008 crisis levels. This is why some experts have now begun to say that the Federal Reserve is too late to cut interest rates, and that a lot of this could have been prevented ahead of time had they eased their policies and cut rates sooner. On top of that, others believe that the Fed rate cuts now signal that 3% inflation is the new 2%, meaning they're never going to get prices to come back down to where they were before. Although in terms of lowering interest rates even further,
I need y'all to hear that. Let me lower this a little. But yeah, I need y'all to hear this. 3% in 3% inflation is the new 2%. So everybody who's waiting for inflation or for interest rates to be rock bottom the way we had during the pandemic, it's just not happening anymore. I'm sorry to tell y'all.
And potentially causing even more inflation. Unfortunately, there is one thing getting in the way, and that would be the 10-year Treasury. So here's what most people don't realize. The Federal Reserve is in charge of controlling and managing what's called the federal funds rate, which is basically the interest rate that banks pay other banks anytime they lend each other money. This is important because the federal funds rate impacts what's called the short-term Treasury yield. And yes, if that sounds confusing, think of it like this because it's very important. On a very broad level, the United States borrows its money by issuing what's called treasuries, which is basically a fancy word of saying it's an IOU that promises a certain rate of return over a certain period of time. In this case, when the Federal Reserve lowers the federal funds rate, like we just saw today, these short-term treasury yields don't need to pay you out as much money, and as a result, they go down. Good news, right? Because borrowing gets cheaper, mortgages go down, stocks go up, right?
Not really.
Not so fast. When it comes to that, those factors are all influenced by what's called the 10-year Treasury yield, as you can see right here. And this is entirely dictated by market supply and demand. That's right. If investors believe that this is a good deal, bond prices go up and the yield goes down. But if investors think that inflation isn't over, or they're pessimistic about the economy, or they just lose faith in the United States, bond prices go down and interest rates go higher, pushing every other interest rate back up alongside with it. And if you think this can't happen, it already has. As you can see, despite the Fed cutting interest rates throughout 2024, mortgage rates didn't budge. In fact, they briefly went even higher because investors feared a return of inflation. The same thing also occurred throughout the 2001 dot-com crash, and also through the early 1990s rate cuts. In each of those, mortgage rates weren't really affected, and even though they trended downwards, that was more of a reflection of lower inflation expectations and an improving economy than what the Federal Reserve did. That is why some people believe that sure, even though the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates could be a sign that more free money is going to be flooding into the economy and sparking a new wave of spending, practically, if inflation remains high or the economy suffers, the interest rates that matter the most could remain unchanged, or even go higher if the United States starts looking less appealing. And this is where a lot of the trouble begins. Like on May 16th of this year, Moody's downgraded the US in terms of their future outlook, going from what's called a AAA rating to AA1, meaning that investing in the United States is no longer as enticing as it used to be in the past. On top of that, Moody's has pointed out that Congress has continuously failed to reduce the national debt and excessive borrowing. Over the next decade, they expect larger deficits as entitlement spending rises while government revenue remains broadly flat, and future performance is likely to deteriorate relative to past performance. That's why they project that by 2035, interest payments will make up 30% of the total budget, which is insane.
Which is still insane to me, to the amount of debt that we're in, the fact that our interest rates are so high. But what else can we do? Like, we're literally spent the last 5 years just printing out cash left and right. And we did say this entire time that if you didn't resolve that soon, you were essentially just kicking the can down the road. And now look what happens. Now we're dealing with a economy that is, honestly, on paper, it looked okay. But in real life, people were losing jobs left and right. People are on unemployment more than we've been in the last couple of years. The stock market looks nice, which is what everybody agrees with. But unfortunately for the people down on Main Street, as we call it, we're struggling out here.
Insane. Now, even though the United States has never defaulted on its debt, and realistically probably never will, this does suggest that the US will have no other choice other than to continue printing more and more and more money. And if fewer investors,
and they will keep printing more and more money because a lot of the time that they owe that money really to themselves within the country. There's only a select like foreign countries that we owe money to. So they're just theoretically going to keep doing this over and over.
Investors are there to buy that debt. The 10-year Treasury could continue to remain high, and that is where a lot of the problems begin. Although before we go into that, here's the reality. The more money the government prints, the less each individual dollar is worth over time. That's why I personally think it's so important to diversify and even earn assets.
We're not gonna do the sponsor role, Reed. But yes, they're going to print out more money if they need to, which means the value of our dollar is going to get lower, which guess what? That means the goods and stuff that we already think are high enough are going to get even higher. The price of eggs, which everybody loved to talk to over the past couple of years, will be higher. The price of gas, the price of pretty much everything we need on a day-to-day basis will go up. And I am really just doing this so Graham Stephan can stop talking about the Gemini credit card. Let's see how far we got left.
Constantly get devalued. Cool stainless steel colors. You have black, silver, rose.
He's still advertising. I can't wait till I get to this point where I gotta start like doing these credit card readings, but
your credit score. So if you'd like to start earning Bitcoin or select from Dustin.com/Graham,
there we go.
A special
Almost
bonus.
done here.
You could get $200 in free Bitcoin when you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days. Again, that's Graham with the link down. Hal just said, and the impact that lower rates are going to have on the entire economy. Let's talk about the housing market. In terms of what we're currently seeing, it's no surprise that housing prices are beginning to slump as more inventory gets listed on the market. And
not only that, with the housing market, what we're actually seeing is that a lot of homeowners are having a hard time even selling their homes now. One, because prices are through the roof and ridiculous, but also because a lot of people who own homes are scared to like leave their homes, get a new mortgage where their new rates are going to be triple what they got. Because a lot of people were buying homes during the pandemic with like sub 2% interest rates. Now you're going from that to like almost 6% over. So it's a lot of inventory going on, but also a lot of fear in the market. But when they start cutting these interest rates down, then that fear is going to be alleviated, which means you're going to see a lot more people back into the markets.
For the first time in years, housing is beginning to lag inflation. In fact, it's said that American housing wealth has actually declined in inflation-adjusted terms over the past year. What's even more apparent is that we're quickly noticing a very big divide in the housing market between those who locked in historically low mortgages and those who bought in the last 2 years. Like, as you can see, the average existing interest rate on California mortgages is currently at 3.8% versus new mortgages coming in at 6.6%.
Okay, I was wrong. So they're actually, mortgages now are like double. The average rate on existing mortgages and the average rate of new ones are now double. But I was talking about more like pandemic levels where it was really low. Favorite splashes, tired of streaming to zero. Oh my gosh, the bots are out here on Kick. No, I am good.
This means you have one segment of the market locked into low interest rates and refusing to move, while the other is paying double for an identical house. Given that, when a home is listed,
imagine being able to build an app with your name on it.
Really? The ads are out. The ads are out. There we go.
Room to negotiate. They can afford to be pickier because there is more to choose from. And when you look at the overall buyer pool today, there are fewer people willing to pay today's prices that haven't already purchased something. Of course, in terms of whether or not lower interest rates are going to positively affect the housing market, the answer is it depends. Unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, the Federal Reserve does not have a direct impact on mortgage rates. Instead, those are influenced by the 10-year Treasury yield, which are dictated by market supply and demand. That's why there's a good chance that mortgages will remain relatively unchanged for the near future, unless the Federal Reserve starts buying the 10-year Treasury yield in an effort to pump more money into the market and drive those yields down, which at this point, nothing would surprise me anymore. Plus, if they actually did do that, it's probably a sign that investors have lost faith in the US economy, and it's a bad sign. Anyway.
Well, I don't know about the investors, but the average person in the US has pretty much lost faith in the economy, and a lot of people are just waiting for it to fall.
Barring the Federal Reserve purposely stepping in to bail out the housing market, realistically, housing prices will continue to soften as more inventory gets listed on the market and prices might begin to decline relative to inflation. On top of that, national home prices have remained fairly stable, so it's unlikely we're going to see a crash, but a softening is definitely something that's in the cards. Although a bigger problem right now might actually be the stock market. Unfortunately, we have a few variables all affecting stock market performance, with the first being treasuries. Like I mentioned earlier, for the foreseeable future, the long-term treasury yield is going to act as the barometer for our entire economy, because this is seen as the risk-free rate of return that every other investment is compared to. Like, to put this into context, if the 30-year treasury offered a risk-free, guaranteed 10% rate of return, Why would you invest in the stock market where you might get an average of 8%? Or why invest in real estate for a 7% return when you could invest in this with no risk or work whatsoever? That's why the more these long-term yields offer, the cheaper other investments need to become in order to compete. And this is what brings us to the first issue. Treasury yields have been rising. In this case, investors are worried that deficit spending is growing out of control. Core inflation is back near 3%, and if the US dollar loses some of its appeal, the market could fall because Treasury yields will rise.
Which, honestly, if the market does fall for any reason at all, I will be getting in there.
Second, we have concentration risk. As you can see, the top 10 companies now make up 40% of the entire S&P 500. And even crazier is that Nvidia now has the biggest weight in the S&P 500 of any individual stock since.
And I just finished talking about this. I released a video back on Monday where I talked about financial stocks and should we get into that. And part of the reason why I said it was because for the longest time, the S&P 500, which is the 500 biggest companies in the US, was pretty much being held by the Magnificent Seven. So your Nvidias, your Apples, your Teslas, Microsoft, etc. And that seems like it's starting to shift as well with all these changes going on in the market. But who knows? We may be in for a crazy market shift in the next couple of months to a year.
The data began in 1981. This is bringing us to a very close comparison to the early 2000s dot-com bubble, where at the time the top 10 companies made up just 25% of the index, which, hey, back then that was a big deal. However, even though market crashes have historically followed periods of high market concentration, like we're seeing now, the data actually shows that market concentration alone doesn't predict future stock market performance. Why? Well, sometimes market concentration is earned by fundamentally strong companies who make a ton of money, while other times it's fueled by speculative mania about to burst. That's why a more reliable indicator of a market bubble is simply how fast the market concentrates. And the faster this occurs, kind of like what we're seeing with Nvidia, the more vulnerability there is for a drop. Of course, that's not to say that we're due for a crash or that the market will just keep going up indefinitely, but it is a reminder of why it's so important never to put all of your eggs in one basket and prefer.
I won't say that we're due for a crash, but I think as a country, we are overdue for some kind of like major correction. I think they said like there's a correction that goes on every 9 or 10 years, and we haven't really had those. We've had periods where like it's like a slight correction and then it goes back up, but we never had anything deep. So who knows? Maybe we are due for one at some point.
Preferably to diversify across as many different asset classes as possible. Although in terms of what Jerome Powell just said and what this means for you, here's what you came for. As of a few hours ago, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 25 basis points, mainly due to one segment of the market that's really beginning to suffer, and that would be jobs. As you could see, for the first time in 4 years, the United States officially has more unemployed people than there are job openings. And this means lower interest rates are coming to the rescue. After all, if businesses have cheaper access to capital,
let's not also forget that there is also a difference between those who are unemployed and also a vast majority of people who are underemployed, meaning that they have to work multiple jobs, including gig work, just to even afford like their basic needs. So this number may actually be worse than what we're seeing on paper.
the more likely they are to reinvest, the more money people should have left over to spend on everything else, and the more this should help prop up the entire economy. Now, in terms of where these jobs are going, it appears as though AI does have some effect. Like even the Federal Reserve said that industries which use AI are seeing a higher unemployment rate than those which don't. So that's something to consider, especially now when one person is able to do a lot more work than they were previously. Although in terms of what else Jerome Powell just said, overall, he was a lot more cautious about the economy than in previous meetings. He still mentioned a concern of whether or not tariffs would have an impact on inflation, and that's why they're taking it meeting by meeting to determine what's going to happen next. However, in terms of where they expect the market to move over the next few years, today is where they release what's called their Summary of Economic Projections, which details exactly what they anticipate to happen in the near future. And now the Federal Reserve has made it clear that they expect to cut by another 50 basis points by the end of the year due to growing job uncertainty. uncertainty. On top of that, they're predicting that inflation will remain above 2% throughout 2028, suggesting that their plan is overall to cut aggressively in 2025 and then take it a bit slower throughout the next year depending on the data. Beyond that, Jerome Powell went on to say that today was a risk management cut and that job growth was below break even. So the market currently believes that the Fed might be too late to cut interest rates, which is why everything has begun selling off towards the end of the day. So overall, in terms of what I think, look, the jobs numbers were pretty bad, and it's not surprising the Federal Reserve is stepping in to rescue the market, even though they're doing that at a time when asset prices are near an all-time high and inflation remains elevated. This is going to be a really unique spot for them to be in, because on the one hand, if they lower interest rates too much, they risk inflation coming back, but if they wait too long, they risk the unemployment rate rising. It's going to be a really delicate balancing act, not to hurt one for the sake of the other. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if we see another small rate cut when they meet in October, and maybe another one when they meet in December. I'm fully expecting them to take it a bit slower than expected. And with Powell's term ending May of 2026, next year could be very interesting if Trump appoints somebody who pushes for even more rate cuts than we're seeing today. But please let me know what you think of this down below in the comment section. I will do my best to read and reply to as many of you as I can. And if you haven't done it already, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you so much, and until next time.
I could tell you, based on the fact that the Federal Reserve already made these rate cuts, they're anticipating more. Jobs numbers are not looking good. That means that they know, okay, we need to fix this now before it gets worse. And basically, they're trying to plug up holes in the boat. I think they did it too late. I think they should have cut rates even earlier than this. But it is going to be very interesting to see like what happens in the next 6 to 12 months. But I'm also curious about this comment section. Like, let's see the top comments on here. I miss when Graham's channel wasn't clickbait. It would say rates are slashed if it's only 0.25%. Here we go. They didn't slash rates. They only projected one cut in 2026. This is not what the market wanted. The Fed is saying that they see weakness, but the economy hasn't broken yet. This is bad. The money printers are not going burr. The rates are not being slashed. This is more of a sign that we're staying in stagflation. You're wrong, Graham. This is a bad sign. So the people are saying that this is not actually a rate, that they didn't slash rates. But if that is the case, and they still think that they're seeing weakness, but it hasn't broken yet, I don't know what they're waiting for then. Like, are you waiting for the market to actually break before you start to really make some big moves? I don't know. How am I 6 minutes in and I don't know what the rate cut is? I give up. Can't believe you got this out so fast. Cutting rates during stagflation is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It attacks the problem from the wrong side. The painful but necessary remedy involves raising rates to extinguish the inflammatory fire first. Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. So we're going to move on from this one, and we're going to start seeing about how some people on YouTube are now believing that we're in for a recession. These are videos that have been all over my homepage since, I want to say June. So I think we're going on like 3-4 months of this. So let's see what we got going on here. George Camel. I know there's a lot of people who don't like Dave Ramsey and Dave Ramsey's other personalities from the show, but I actually really do like George. So let's see what he has to say.
Are we headed into a recession? Are we already in one? Or is all this economic gloom and doom just another case of the media fear-mongering for clicks? Well, before you start panic buying super mega packs of Charmin Ultra Strong, let's talk about what a recession really...
Before we get into that, somebody needs to tell me, why in the world were we buying toilet paper during the pandemic? Like, out of all things, I understood batteries, I understood food, I understood lights, generators, all that. But it still baffles me to this day that we did toilet paper kind of like it was gold.
Is, and more importantly, how you can be ready for it. But before we jump in, give those like and subscribe buttons a click, and share this video with your hoarding Aunt Edna, who still has a basement full of vintage Charmin from 2020. And
that Like we really did toilet paper as if it was that crazy. And funny enough, with my grandmother, I love her very much, she did that with rubbing alcohol. Like at one point she had at least like 30 bottles in the house.
That was a good year for Charmin. I don't know, the berries were just right that year. Great harvest. The cotton was just right that year. Really gave it a great sheet. Almost a oily viscosity. The mouth feel on that Charmin 2020 vintage.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
Okay, first of all, what even is a recession? That's important to cover. Technically, it's when the gross domestic product, or GDP, has been down for 2 quarters in a row, which is 6 months or 3.5 dog years. And in case it's been a while since your last economics lesson, GDP is the total value of all the goods and services produced within a country. But even if GDP has been down for 6 months straight, it's not officially a recession until the National Bureau of Economic Research says it is. And they monitor all kinds of data, like personal income, employment, consumer spending, wholesale retail sales, industrial production, and GDP. And the NBA...
Well, I can tell you, we're spending less than what we typically do. Actually, not even. We are spending like the same amount, if not more. The difference is we're putting them on massive payments, which is why everybody has been making videos now that apps like Klarna, Affirm, Afterpay have been so bad because we're doing the same amount of spending, but just putting it for longer payment periods. But on top of that, again, you have the jobs issue going on. I don't think we're really producing much in this country anymore. A lot of the stuff is now imported. So personal opinion, with the way everybody is living nowadays, we may be in for a recession, in my opinion.
EER defines a recession as, quote, a significant decline in economic activity that's spread across the economy and that lasts for more than a few months. So basically, a recession is when the economy goes down in the dumps for 6 months to a year. And this usually means the stock market tanks, companies lose money or go bankrupt, and people lose jobs. Not ideal. There are several things that can lead to a recession, including inflation, check, economic shock, like a pandemic, wars, oil prices, or tariffs.
Really? I was waiting for the check mark for this. Hold on.
Check, check, checkity, check, check. And lastly, asset bubbles, which is when people are so excited to invest in certain assets, like stocks, bonds, or property, that they drive the price way above the actual value. And eventually...
Does that sound familiar? The stock market, real estate, both of those are extremely inflated right now.
That bubble bursts, people start selling, and the value of the asset takes a nosedive, which then causes big losses for investors and businesses that can spread to the entire economy. That's exactly what happened during the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. And by the way, can we stop calling it the Great Recession? It's a little bit dramatic. I mean, yeah, it was a rough time, don't get me wrong, but nobody was dying on the Oregon Trail from dysentery here, all right? It wasn't quite Great Depression level. I mean, in 2007, the iPhone had just released, Rihanna just dropped Umbrella. We had it pretty good, all things considered. Woe is you. Now, you might be thinking, well, George, I've seen some bubbles. Well, those are mini bubbles. You're talking NFTs and meme stocks, not things that are actually affecting the overall economy. So, are we in a recession? Well, at the time of this recording, GDP has declined 2 quarters, but NBER has not declared a recession. So technically, no. But their declaration can lag several months behind when the economy is actually in a recession. So let's cover this question. Are we headed there? Let's say
yes, we are. It's weird to say that GDP declines for 2 straight quarters, but we have to wait for somebody else to tell us that we're in a recession. No, we're in a recession when we're in a recession. I don't think I need to wait several months to find out.
Take a look at some of the warning signs. Sign number 1, negative GDP growth. This would mean businesses are making less, people are spending less, and the overall engine of the economy is slowing down. According to recent data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, GDP increased at an annual rate of 2.4% in the 4th quarter of 2024. So we're good here. It's going up a little bit. Sign number 2 is rising unemployment. If companies are laying off workers or freezing hiring, that's a warning sign. Because if people are out of work, spending less, and struggling to cover their bills, that's likely going to make the economy slow down even more. And according to a recent jobs report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the unemployment rate for March of 2025 was 4.2%, which is up a teeny tiny bit from the previous month's rate of 4.1%. Now, that's not...
So I do want to say, for full transparency's sake, so the video from Graham Stephan that we saw last was just released a couple of days ago. This video from George Camel is about 3 months old. So if you see inconsistencies in the information being presented, that's because there was a bit of time between both of these videos being released. Every video you see from here on out is about 3 months old, at least at this point.
A lot, but it has been increasing since January, so it's not a surefire indicator, but it's something to consider and to keep watching. Sign number 3, consumer spending drops. When people stop spending money, businesses stop growing. It's that simple. And recently, consumer spending has increased, but at a slower pace. Sign number 4.
Again, that consumer spending can seem like it's slowing down. At least for right now, I don't think it has. I think it's just the fact that consumer spending has now shifted more to payment models where we're basically giving our money to Affirm, Afterpay, Klarna to get our item, and then we put it for like payments for way down the road. So I don't believe spending has slowed down yet, but I think with the rise in unemployment, we're going to start seeing that slowdown in consumer spending very soon.
Credit tightens. If banks tighten lending, which means higher interest rates, stricter approvals, that slows down spending on big things like homes, cars, and business investments. And that can drag down the economy even further. Now, we all know interest rates are higher than most of us would like them to be right now. And according to the Fed, senior loan officers have recently reported tighter lending standards for commercial and industrial loans. So yes, this one has been happening lately. Sign number 5, the old inverted yield curve. Now, this one's a bit complicated, but here's the Cliff Notes version. A yield curve shows the interest rates on government bonds. Now, normally, long-term bonds pay more than short-term ones. But if short-term ones pay more, that's called an inverted yield curve. And it has predicted every U.S. recession since the 1950s. It basically means investors are nervous about the near future. So it's time to play everyone's favorite game, Is It Inverted? All right, let's check my favorite website to figure this out. Is the yield curve inverted? Today. I'm literally telling you the website. Here we go.
Wait, that's
no inversion. That's a good sign. But you still need to look at the full picture to see if it.
I want to check this out.
I'm literally telling you the website.
Hold on.
Today.
Is the yield curve inverted? Today. I kind of want to check this website out. Bear with me. Is the yield curve inverted? Today. Is the yield curve inverted? Whatever. I'm just gonna type in today. Is the yield, EILD, curve inverted today? I just want to know if this is real. Okay, I don't see it. Whatever.
Today. I'm literally telling you the website. Here we go. No inversion. That's a good sign. But you still need to look at the full picture to see if it.
I will also say that was as of April 30th of this year. Now we're in September 18th. So take that with what you missed.
Was inverted recently along with other factors. But I'll take the win for now. This is a rare time where a no is a good thing. Hey, editors, get a good look at the curve on that yield. Okay, here we go. Key rates. Here's the key rates. 4.17 on the 10-year Treasury, 3.6 on the 2-year. So if the 10-year is higher, good. If the 2-year is higher, bad. I should be teaching this at a college level. That's what I'm realizing. Oh, I love a good yield. Look at that yield. Look at the curve on that.
Hey!
This is getting weird.
Sign number 6 is stock market volatility. Wild swings or long-term downward trends usually mean investors are nervous about the future. And when confidence drops, people pull back, which can turn fear into reality. And as of this recording, the last month in the stock market has seen sharp swings and continued declines. Clear signs that investor confidence is shaky right now. So, are we headed into a full-blown recession this year?
Which I can attest to as well, because when I was doing my video on the finance stocks, I had to look up the current stock prices for the Magnificent Seven with a couple of bank stocks, and they are pretty much in the red for the year.
My Magic 8 Ball says, ask again later. The truth is, we just don't know. But it's smart to be prepared either way. Because a recession is like a Fast and Furious movie. The question is not if another one's coming, it is when. And I'm not saying that to scare you guys. I'm saying that because Fast and Furious 11 is already slated to release in 2026.
No. Not again.
And because recessions are a normal part of the economy and they're temporary. Unlike Fast and Furious, which will always be with us. It's like an STD, or in this case, an STVD. Shout out to my man, Vin. Most unhinged name. Is that his real name? Or is it Vincent? Is it Vincent Diesel? I gotta Google this. Vin Diesel full name. Oh, you guys are gonna be so disappointed. That guy's name is Mark. Mark Sinclair. Wow, it sounds like he should be making dark chocolate.
When Verizon gives you a free phone on any plan,
Gemini, show me the concealer.
you use AI.
I'll kill you with my teacup.
All right, back to recession stuff. We've actually had 13 recessions since World War II, and the average length of each was about 10 months. So hopefully you can see that there's no need to break out into hives or start hoarding cans of SpaghettiOs whenever you hear the word recession on the news. But you do need a plan, and I don't mean buying gold bars or turning your garage into a doomsday bunker. I'm talking about a legitimate plan for your money that helps you stay calm, smart, and financially bulletproof whenever a recession does come knocking. To make that happen, you'll need to take 5 important steps, and we'll cover them in just a second. Before I break down how to protect yourself from a recession, let me tell you how I protect myself from shady data broker sites selling my personal information.
Nope.
And that's by using Delete Me, the sponsor of today's video. Look in the description below.
Nope, we're
okay,
not doing
here's
ads.
the plan to recession-proof your money. Step 1, ditch your debt. Debt is not your friend. It's the roommate who steals your food, never pays rent, and leaves mysterious stains on your couch. That better be dark chocolate, Mark. If that's me.
So here on out, I will warn you. If you haven't seen any of Dave Ramsey or his Ramsey Personalities videos before, they preach a 7 baby step method. So everything you're going to hear from this point out is going to be based on these baby steps. Paying off your debt, that's baby step number 2.
Milk chocolate, we got problems. You know I have issues with dairy.
He knows I'm lactose intolerant. He's taunting me.
And when times get tough, debt becomes a financial landmine just waiting to blow up your budget. But when you get rid of your debt, you'll have fewer payments to worry about and more money in your pocket, both of which come in handy during a recession. And things like higher food prices or a dip in the stock market don't hurt as much when you aren't spending most of your paycheck on debt payments. So start knocking out your debts one at a time using the debt snowball method. This is where you list your debts out from smallest to largest and pay minimums on everything except for that smallest one.
And if you are struggling with debt, please utilize this method. I know there's another one in the debt avalanche, but that's really only for like the big math nerds that care more about the interest rates than anything else. But for a lot of us, we need these quick wins in order to actually pay off debt. So go with the snowball.
One, attack it with a vengeance until it's gone and you freed up that payment. Now you freed up that payment plus all the extra money and attack the next one. So you rinse and repeat this until you're totally debt free. Step number 2, get on a budget. Without a budget, your money is just aimlessly wandering the streets like a toddler with an ice cream cone in the middle of July. It's gonna get messy. So download my favorite budgeting app called EveryDollar and start making a plan for your money today. It's free, it's easy, and it will put you in control of your money instead of just chaos when it comes to your finances. I'll put the link in the description below, or you can go to everydollar.com/George to get started. Step number 3, build an emergency fund.
So I'm telling you, all of these are based on the baby steps. Ditch your debt. Baby step 2, get on a budget. Technically, that's not a baby step, but that's just a general rule of theirs. Build an emergency fund. That's baby step, I think, 3.
This is where the true magic happens, because you'll finally be building for your future instead of paying for your past. And that starts with saving 3 to 6 months of expenses once you're out of debt. This emergency fund is like a storm shelter for your money. It's going to give you cushion for whenever life throws you a recession, a job loss, or a busted transmission. And no, this is not for emergency fund. It's got to be urgent, unexpected, and necessary. So no matter how tempting it may be, don't use your emergency fund for a Black Friday sale, a surprise brunch, or a spontaneous girls trip. We're talking real emergencies here, like your HVAC giving up in July, or your kid deciding to test gravity with their arm. Step number 4, leave your investments alone. No touching. Now listen, I get it. When the market tanks, it can feel like your 401k has turned into a 201k. But that's why you need to invest with a long-term mindset and avoid trying to time the market. When you're playing the long game, a market downtick is not a crisis, it's an opportunity. That's when mutual funds go on sale, and we love a discount. Plus, even if it takes a while, the stock market always rebounds from dips and dives, and there's over 100 years of history to prove it. So don't pull your money out of the market. Remember this line: time in the market beats timing the market. So be boring, be patient, stay consistent. That is your key to being wealthy down the road. Step number 5, reevaluate your job situation. look at your job and ask, is this stable? And while no job is 100% recession-proof, it does help if you're working in an industry that fills an essential need and won't be affected by how good or bad the economy is doing. For example, regardless of how the economy is doing, people need to buy food. So, people working in grocery stores have solid job security. Same goes.
I don't know about that. Especially here in New York, if we have Mamdani and his government-run grocery stores in here, there's going to be a lot of local mom and pop shops that are going to be going. And I could get into a whole spiel about that one another day.
For teachers, repair techs, public safety professionals, medical professionals, and funeral homes. People may skip the guac during a recession, but they're still going to be born and they're still going to croak. Circle of life, baby.
But his whole thing is true. If you are working in an industry that is essentially part of a necessity in a person's life, you will have pretty much the best job security compared to most people. So if you're working in anything that has to do with someone's health, with someone's death, medical, food, anything like that, food not being restaurants, you'll be fine. If you're working at a restaurant, depends. If consumer spending does take a dip, people are not going to go out to eat as much, which means they may start doing some layoffs.
Wow, that's really deep.
So if you are working in a job that could be affected by a recession, it's not a bad idea to start growing your skills and exploring your options in case you need to make a job transition. Don't wait until after your boss invites you to a mysterious 15-minute quick connect with no agenda. Spoiler, he's not asking you to test out his new dark chocolates.
And I will keep saying this, sales. Like, if you're somebody who is like me, I went to college. I dropped out of college. If you need a skill that you can learn pretty easily through YouTube videos, books, and that every job is going to need, it is sales. And everybody talks about it where, how do I say this? Everybody looks at sales like it's a dying breed because of the rise of like online shopping. But you got to think about it like this. Nobody buys a high ticket product, and I mean high ticket as like over 4 figures, without really needing to talk to a human. Maybe the Apple fanatics doing that with their iPhones and their MacBooks. But when you're talking about things like apartment rent, cars, things like that, people need to talk to other people before doing it. So if you want my advice, you want a career that is stable but also flexible because you could go in a variety of different industries, sales is the place to be in.
Okay, you're probably getting laid off, bud. Okay, so that covers what you should do to prepare for a recession. But there are also some things you shouldn't do. For starters, do not panic. Fear is a terrible financial advisor, and it never leads to good decisions. Mostly just 2 a.m. Amazon orders that you'll regret before they even get to your house. Next, don't rack up extra debt. That's not a plan, it's a trap. Stay out of it, don't get more of it. Then, don't stop investing out of fear. Okay, long-term gains always beat short-term stress. Stay with it. And finally, don't believe every headline. The news only cares about clicks and views. It's about panic, not peace. And please, for the love, don't hoard toilet paper, okay? A recession may make your money tighter. It's not going to spontaneously give you IBS. And if you do have money-related gut issues, consider this your sign to take a daily probiotic. Now, here's the bottom line. The economy might dip, tank, or do the cha-cha slide. But if you've got a plan, you're not going to go down with it. And you're not doing the cha-cha. We're done with the cha-cha slide. No more cha-cha slide. Don't try it, wedding DJ. It's not going to get people on the dance floor, all right? 2 hops this time. Bam, bam. That's the best part of that song, is just that sound effect where it goes bam, bam. If you're sitting there thinking, where do I even start? Well, you can take our free assessment to get a custom next step based on your money situation. I'll drop the link to that in the description below. And if debt is the biggest obstacle standing between you and being prepared for a recession, keep watching to see this video where I break down the best way to pay off your debt.
Yeah, okay, so this is pretty much the end of the video. I will say, I do really like all the Ramsey personalities for how simple they make a lot of these videos, because he mentioned how to tell if a recession is coming in a way that anybody can digest and understand. But I will not be watching any more of them, because watching one video from a Ramsey personality, you've probably seen them all. All right, moving on to Economics Explained. Is this the recession the U.S. needs to have? So this was released 3 months ago, 525,000 views. So let's see what they got to say about whether or not we're going to be in a recession or should we be in one.
More in debt than it ever has been before. But Between governments, companies, and individuals, we owe $315 trillion to one another, which is roughly 300% of global GDP. At even a modest rate, that means 10% of all productive output for the entire planet is consumed by interest payments alone, which puts the global economy in a pretty vulnerable situation. Over recent decades, we've refined a system to smooth out natural economic booms and busts by pushing lots of money into the economy during bad times to get things moving again. What we arguably haven't got as good at, though, is taking our foot off the accelerator during good times to make sure things don't go too far. The massive accumulation of debt this has resulted in is just one symptom of this problem, and controversially, it may not even be the biggest concern. We owe this debt to one another. One person's liability is another person's asset, and beyond that, it's just numbers in a database. But this refusal to let the economy feel pain might be genuinely hurting our long-term prosperity. In the past, hard economic times cleared out unproductive businesses and offered an opportunity for economies to reallocate scarce resources to more promising areas. Today, in an age of meme coins worth more than centuries-old car companies and endless businesses raising billions of dollars for no clear reason, it's understandable why more economists are calling for a bit of cold water to sober up the exuberance. It's understandable to see why we may not think.
And that's another thing you have to notice, like the signs are all there. Like you mentioned, companies getting funding without really any kind of money coming in. You got to understand, there's a lot of companies here like Uber, like Airbnb, like who was it, WeWork. They were funded without ever seeing a little bit of profit. Like, if you were putting money in there knowing that you're not going to get that money back, but you're hoping for the exponential growth down the road, you would be seen as ridiculous. But yet, that is how our economy's been going. And for heaven's sake, the meme coins, the NFTs, I'm still wondering to this day why they grew so big. Like, was it just like the influencer culture that we're in, where YouTubers, TikTokers, Instagrammers were like all saying, yeah, you should invest in my coin, or you should invest in this NFT. I got this gorilla digital thing that you can just screenshot, but you can buy it for like $4,000. I don't understand why that grew to be as big as it did.
That resources are necessarily being allocated in the most efficient manner. And oh boy, what luck. A trade war combined with a growing number of actual wars in globally strategic regions could be exactly that opportunity. But is this the recession that we need to have? Will it do any long-term good? And finally, will we be willing to let it get that bad?
I'll answer that last one. The United States will not let it get as bad. Like, they will print money, they will do whatever it takes to do to ease up the economy. But this is what I say about capitalist society. We need to be able to have that freedom to succeed, but we also really need that freedom to fail. And unfortunately, the United States as a country have proven that they will rather bail out somebody than to ever let them fail if it's a big enough industry. Look at banking.
So, as you've probably been following in the news in the past weeks, trade wars are on again, especially between China and the US. The US just rolled out new tariffs on Chinese goods, saying it's about trade imbalances and national security. And depending on where you get your news, those recent tariff hikes on China are either a brilliant geopolitical masterstroke or a reckless move that could spiral into a global recession. Tariffs aren't just policy, they're market signals. But like so many issues today, they're distorted by partisan spin, a major risk to global economies, and your wallet. That's why our team relies on Ground News. They built the only app and website showing us how stories are covered across the political spectrum, each source's credibility, and potential consequences to misdoing. One look at their blind to understand the Access Vantage plan I've been using to track critical issues. Just click the explain or... An admittedly really annoying feature of economics is the phrase, it depends. Ask an economist what 1 + 1 equals, and they'll tell you it depends if both of those ones are acting in their own rational self-interest. This also extends to hard and fast definitions on things as universally important as what a recession is. For modern industrialised and capitalist economies, that definition is typically something along the lines of a sustained period of weak or negative growth in real GDP, which may or may not be accompanied by a significant rise in the unemployment rate. Some institutions will draw a line and say that a sustained period is something specific like 2 quarters or 6 months, but even that varies a lot.
Okay, I heard 2 quarters in the first video. Now they're saying it could be 6 months depending on who you ask. I need us, 2 quarters, 6 months, what is it, 12? Listen, I just need a set defined period. If we're going 2 quarters, which what, 6 months also? Because a quarter is 3. Oh my gosh, I can't tell math right now. Yes, a quarter of a year is 3 months. All right, cool. So it's basically saying the same thing.
It's a bit wishy-washy with lots of wiggle room and lots of variation, and that's partially by design because unlike saying bankruptcy, just the mention of recession will cause things to happen. Now, another thing that's worth looking at is what negative growth actually means, because it's really not very intuitive. Growth is usually measured using gross domestic product, which is the sum of all final goods and services produced in an economy in a given year. Since the Industrial Revolution, it's been more or less the assumption that new technologies, more people, and more global cooperation would allow us to make more stuff in a given year than the year before. And, for the most part, that's been true. Over the last 250 years, the global economy has produced, on average, about 3% more stuff every year than it did the year before. Now, that might not sound like a whole lot, but through the magic of compounding returns over a long time period, the world today produces about 150 times more stuff every year than it did back at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or with a population roughly 7 times larger. Which means the average global citizen today has access to about 20 times the goods and services of someone 250 years ago. Yes, of course, that's not spread evenly, but most people are doing much better overall. Now, in that time, there hasn't actually been smooth, consistent growth. There were interruptions where in given years we actually ended up producing less than the year before. Now, some of these were pretty simple to understand.
Okay, I take back what I said. Apparently we are producing more than what I thought we were.
Huge natural disasters, pandemics, or other crises had a tangible impact on the industrial process that made it harder to make stuff. I'm assuming most of you watching lived through the global pandemic, which shut down factories and slowed shipping, which is a classic example of a supply shock.
Which, I want to know, like, where were y'all at during the pandemic and what were y'all doing? Because here in New York, all we had to do during the pandemic was sit around and watch then Governor Cuomo, like, give random updates throughout the entire day and basically told us, yeah, you have to just stay at home the entire time, which annoyed me.
Didn't live through that. I don't know what you're doing here. Go and watch Bluey instead. It's much more interesting.
Wait, why are you using Monday.com? It's not for developers.
Oh. Anyway, there have also been years where we produced less stuff than the year before without any clear reason as to why. A Martian watching over us from space wouldn't have seen any reason why the economy took a massive hit in 2008, for example. But these are the more common types of recession these days, and they are largely caused by a slowdown in market activity, which scares people and businesses into holding onto their money, which in turn leads to a slowdown in market activity, because businesses aren't going to make stuff if nobody's going to buy it, and people aren't going to buy as much.
Okay, this brings back a simple economics lesson that nobody seems to want to understand. The economy is a huge circle. So if people aren't spending money, hence less consumer spending, then businesses don't make money. If businesses don't make money, they cannot pay their employees. If they cannot pay their employees, guess what? They're going to simply lay off their employees, which is what spikes the unemployment rate. If the employee gets laid off, there's less household income coming in. There's less household income, even more people are not going to be spending money. And that's what causes this circle that drives us down to a recession, if not worse. The problem I have with a lot of people is that they hear that and think it's just too simple, that there's supposed to be more nuance to this, that it's supposed to be like a lot more technical. No, anybody who works a regular job can fully understand this when you look at the bigger picture like this.
Much if they may or may not have a job in the immediate future. This is why these are called demand-side shocks. Intuitively, these don't make as much sense. We have the capacity to make more stuff, but we choose not to. However, intentional or not, they do serve a very important purpose, which is relocating resources away from unnecessary, overvalued, or inefficient parts of the economy back towards areas with more promise, so that theoretically the economy can grow back bigger and stronger. The tech bubble popping in 2001 started with a significant correction in the stock market, but that fear did spread out more broadly into the economy as people lost their jobs with these companies, and the businesses that in turn relied on the spending from those employees who also lost customers and so on. Now, recessions are brutal, especially for average people who are mostly just unwilling passengers along for the ride. But from the perspective of a purely cold-hearted economist, this crash and the downturn in productivity that came with it did clear out a glut of really dumb companies writing off easy investor money that had little to no hope of ever reliably adding value to the broader economy. As these questionable businesses...
I've never heard of either one of those companies.
shut down, it left more investor capital, advertising space, and human talent to be used in businesses with more promise, which gave rise to the major tech companies we have today. Now, whether they have been good for society as a whole is up for debate, but they are certainly highly productive. A similar sort of thing happened in 2008. That recession was kicked off by major structural issues in the way that home financing was handled, but it did shift the economy away from over-financialised real estate and made other types of investments more popular, which in theory gave opportunity to businesses that made things instead of just real estate. In Canada and here in Australia, we never really experienced the full impacts of this recession because our banking system was far more heavily regulated and because housing had not yet become such a large speculative asset class. But not getting this big shake-up is largely cited as one of the reasons why our real estate markets are so out of hand today. Darwinism in the social sciences is always a bit ick, but a recession really is like a predator thinning the herd. Without them in complete isolations, the herd would grow too fast and exhaust all of the food in the area, leading to widespread starvation and limiting the future growth of the group. Now, the important thing to note here is that this doesn't mean that regular recessions are a good thing, or even a necessary evil, because there are more efficient ways to clear out the dead wood. Recessions don't only kill off underperforming businesses and remotivate workers or else, they also kill off plenty of otherwise healthy businesses, especially new businesses, that might only just be getting going and are still reliant on investment. To stretch the analogy, there are plenty of young and even very fit and healthy wildebeests that can be eaten by predators if they just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Something like the housing crisis of 2008, for example, didn't need to end up in a recession. With better economic policies around lending regulation and more of an incentive for people to invest into productive industries instead of just flipping houses, this didn't need to happen. Similarly with something like the dot-com bubble. Speculative exuberance is very hard to control because as humans we are very stupid, but an extremely hot market can be cooled down in other ways that doesn't involve a spectacular crash, which in turn takes the rest of the economic system out with it. So that's why recessions happen, and the hidden good that they can do for long-term economic efficiency.
I think if you're not
and
using
we're
a
getting
van
more
to
ad
do
breaks.
business travel, then you're missing out.
I was just getting into this.
But it's also worth addressing why they are so painful, or more specifically, who they are really painful for. Just making less stuff than what was made the quarter before theoretically shouldn't be disastrous news. What's more is that it doesn't even necessarily mean we are losing any tangible wealth. Let's say an entire economy is encapsulated in just one business making widgets. If this business normally makes 10 million widgets every quarter, but for the last 2 quarters it's only made 9 million widgets, then by the most clinical definition, this economy would be in a recession. But here's the thing. The economy doesn't automatically throw every widget into the incinerator at the end of every quarter. Goods can accumulate and some last a very long time, providing wealth for their extended existence. In this example, the economy might be making 1 million less widgets than it did the quarter before, but it still has 9 million more widgets overall. GDP is a flow. It measures how much stuff is made in a given time period. Wealth is a stock. It should be the accumulation of everything that's been made and has not yet been consumed. If someone builds a house, there will be a big spike in GDP in the quarter it's built because, well, houses are expensive and producing one is a big undertaking. But the next quarter, even though we can't record that house on our GDP figures, doesn't mean that the house isn't still giving a family a place to live. So then what is it really that makes the recession so scary in our modern economies? Well, the first thing is that, of course, not everything that we produce is a durable good that will last for a long time.
Like
some
our
goods
food.
are consumed relatively rapidly, like food, medicine, personal care products, and other general disposables. Beyond that, even things that can last indefinitely require a lot of maintenance just to keep standing. We actually made an entire video last year about how in our modern built-up world, just rust alone costs the global economy more than the entire nation of India produces in a year. So, unfortunately, even for those long-term goods, we need to keep producing just to maintain them. Beyond that, the much larger category is services. Things that have value but are by definition consumed as soon as they are made. Accounting work, schooling, tradesmen fixing and replacing rusted out infrastructure. These are the things that have value but need to be repeatedly produced to maintain the living standards that they make possible. Most advanced economies actually produce far more value in services than they do in physical goods, so a slowdown in these does mean that immediate sacrifices need to be made by someone. Normally, that's the people that were producing these services but end up losing their jobs producing services because no one was consuming services, and now they can't consume services either because they don't have a job. But beyond this, there is one other reason why we have become so worried about recessions, which leads us up to today. Most advanced economies in the world today are probably in a recession. Again, it really depends on exactly how that is defined. We have probably produced fewer goods and services over the last 2 quarters due to uncertainty around tariffs from the USA, which is simultaneously the world's largest consumer market and a major industrial power. For now, unemployment looks relatively low, but with endless news about layoffs, that is likely to be adjusted as more data comes in, because, oh yeah, as if economists weren't annoying enough on this issue already, the time it takes to collect and make sense of economic data on the scale of entire countries means that often those countries are in a recession for a year or more before it's officially recognised. So then, what would this maybe session be correcting? Well, the idea is that just like the economy was overinvested in silly tech stocks in the 1990s and mortgage securities in the early 2000s, the world is now overinvested in globalisation, which has made a lot of places a lot of money, but has come at the expense of workers who have had their jobs outsourced. Some have argued that instead of waiting for this to eventually collapse under its own weight, it's better to push it over. Now, that might be a generous interpretation of policies that have for now, for the most part, been entirely walked back, but is the damage done?
Yes.
If recessions really are...
I will tell you, yes, it is done. The damage is already there. We're just waiting for the full-on collapse to happen.
Necessary evil to rebalance the economy and make sure that weak, wasteful areas are culled, then this is less like a hungry lion picking off weak stragglers and more like a poacher machine gunning the entire herd. It's not just bad businesses and workers that are going to get taken out by this. Stability and confidence takes a long time to build up, and it can be lost almost instantly. Businesses are not going to make major investments until they have certainty about which way these trade wars are going, but in the meantime, that will have other consequences. The other reason that modern recessions are so scary is that debt pile that has been slowly building up. The world has a lot of it now, and while it's helped to inflate a lot of assets, it's also helped to inflate a lot of assets that aren't necessarily that productive. If cash is the lifeblood of the economy, we might be starting to get high blood pressure, which means any little tremor becomes a lot scarier. All other things being equal, it is okay if a country produces slightly less stuff. But a lot of lending is predicated on the idea of a continually growing economy, and if it doesn't, those lenders are still going to want their money. Now, one of those borrowers that looks a little bit shaky is the US federal government itself, the most indebted institution in the history of humanity in absolute terms. There was also the argument that this induced recession was a way to lower interest rates before a lot of old debt gets rolled over, but instead it's just scared those lenders by reintroducing the possibility that the US could default, which has actually made borrowing more expensive. Now, heightened indebtedness is something that a lot of people are struggling with. A lot of people don't have any wealth to fill in these temporary dips. For the people that do, it's a little bit scary as the nominal value of their assets will drop, and if they are in directly impacted industries, they can lose. But for the most part, it's either a buying opportunity or business as usual. But a lot of producers in the economy are making stuff so that they can consume stuff so that they can continue to make stuff, what a normal person might call living paycheck to paycheck. Even a small reduction in total output can hurt these participants disproportionately. Could this be spun as the recession that we need to have? Well, it depends. The economy arguably has some silly features at the moment. Is enacting policies that have a very high chance of inducing a recession the right way to fix them? Well, no. That's like inducing a coma to treat a headache. Probably a bit of an overreaction, not necessarily that well targeted, and likely to cause more problems than fixes. Now, we have made an entire video on the exact mechanism of these, let's say, constantly fluctuating advanced trade negotiations. As always, we didn't want to repeat too much here, but you should be able to click to that video on your screen now.
I'm not gonna lie, there was a good portion of this video where I just felt like I was gonna end up repeating the same things I've been saying this entire stream. So I was just like, I think I'd rather just let it play out. Also, me trying to get my lighting correct. You know what? This is the best I can get it. I will play around with the colors when I am off stream to try to fix this for the next time. Or I could actually brighten this up. Ooh, wow, too bright. Too bright. This is the best I'm going to get it. So we just going to move on to the next one. All right, this is going to be a bit of a long one, so this might be the last one I go into. But Bigger Pockets, which is a big brand when it comes to real estate investing, they did a whole podcast episode about whether or not we're heading to a recession. So if there's some people that I trust to know whether or not the signs are there, it's people that are investing in one of the asset classes that have been going crazy in terms of pricing for the last several years. So let's see what they got to say.
Saw 3 headlines that perfectly capture our economic confusion. Number 1, a weak economy is good for military recruiting. Number 2, Amazon Prime Day is down by 41%. And number 3, GDP growth beats expectations. So here's the $1 million question, or should I say trillion question. Are we in a recession, heading into one, or completely missing the real story? Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Pockets Money Podcast. My name is Mindy Jensen, and with me, as always, is my not receding anytime soon from being my co-host, Scott Trench.
I was really hoping I had a few more years before jokes about my hairline made it onto the podcast intro, but I think we're here.
Don't worry, my friend. At least you're not me. My hairline is non-existent.
Speaking of receding, we're going to be joined once again by Jay Scott on today's episode to discuss whether or not we are in a recession here in the United States. He's going to help us separate economic reality from economic anxiety, and we're going to dive into what the data actually shows, why experts are split, and why not just experts, but the community here at Bigger Pockets Money is actually split, and most importantly, what this means for your money, your job, and your FI journey. Jay, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always thrilled to be here.
Jay Scott is a real estate expert. He has written, 150 books or 5 books, same thing, about real estate, negotiating real estate, estimating rehab costs, etc. But he's also really into the economy. Jay, what is a recession? Let's define this first of all before we start talking about, are we in a recession?
Yep. And they don't want to tell us what's in a recession.
Software, I can keep my cash flow.
What are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's funny. That really should be an easy question to answer, but it's probably one of the harder questions you're going to ask me today. Let's start with there's actually no formal definition of a recession where we can kind of check a bunch of boxes and definitively say, yep, we're in one, or nope, we're not in one. That said, the mainstream media does like to use the metric of GDP, gross domestic product, which is basically the total economic output of the country. And they like to use that as a measure of whether we're in a recession or not. And so the common mainstream definition is that if GDP decreases, in other words, if the economy shrinks for 2 quarters in a row, we like to think that we're in a recession. And so if we look at where we are right now, Q1 of this year, we actually saw GDP shrink. We saw negative growth in the economy in Q1 of this year. Q2 ended in the end of June.
Just want to double check. When was this video released? Okay, this is about a month old. So as of last month, GDP growth shrunk. So
we won't get the GDP numbers.
Shrunk.
We won't get the data for economic growth or shrinkage until the end of July. So we won't know until the end of July if GDP is negative for Q2. But if at the end of July we find that GDP number is negative, we're going to start to hear a lot of people talking about the fact that we're in a recession. So that's one way to look at it. But there's actually another way to look at it that I prefer. That's that there happens to be a government agency, NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, who's tasked with determining when we're officially in a recession. And it's basically just a group of people who look at the data and they decide if they think we're in one or not. And they have the final say when it comes to the official government determination of when we are or aren't in a recession. And interestingly, it's pretty common for this group of people to wait until after the recession is either well underway or even until after it's over to actually declare that there was a recession. So while they aren't saying we're in a recession today, they could get together next year or even the year after that and decide that we're actually in a recession right now, at which point the government will retroactively declare a recession and update all their charts. Now, that's the official definition of recession, but the reality is that official definitions are less important than just simply keeping our fingers on the pulse of where the economy is headed. Instead of thinking about, are we in a recession, are we not in a recession, I actually prefer to think about the economy as a spectrum. So our job as investors is to look at various pieces of data and just try to determine, are things getting better, are things getting worse, are they getting stronger, are they getting weaker? So that way we can generate a good strategy moving forward for our portfolios.
I want to just chime in here and try my hand at this as well in a couple of ways and see what you think. I'm looking up a couple of definitions of recession here, and yes, there's the 2 quarters of GDP contraction as one of the technical definitions. But there's also just this general concept of it being a contraction in broad economic activity characterized by rising unemployment, lower consumer spending, lower corporate profits, lower valuations in a variety of asset classes and those types of things. And that's what makes this so hard, is that there's components of this that from a media perspective are subjective.
But that feels like it's more of an accurate way to determine this, because higher unemployment, lower consumer spending, these are things that we are seeing. Again, I go back and forth on the whole consumer spending, because is it really lower consumer spending, or is the way that we're spending just on a more ridiculous level with buy now, pay later? But we do have the joblessness issues with the jobs reports coming out very bad compared to expectation. Let's just assume we have the lower consumer spending. Asset prices are near highs through the roof and just not getting the amount of exposure and interest that they once did. And stock prices, they're at all-time highs, but profits are not really there, especially if you look at the tech sector. So prices are starting to come down there. So maybe we are in a recession right now.
And we don't know whether we're in a recession or not in an official capacity until long after it, and that leads to endless discussions about it and lots of conjecturing about it. So based on these definitions, what do you think? Are we in a recession or not right now?
Again, I don't like that determination. Let's approach it from a 10,000 foot level, and then I'll answer that question. So I think you hit the nail on the head. At the end of the day, the economy consists of two main groups: the people that are in the economy and the businesses that are in the economy. And so if we want to know if we're in a recession or if the economy is getting better or weaker, we're going to look at how people and businesses are reacting and the data around people and businesses. And you mentioned a couple important pieces of data. Number one, unemployment. So do people have jobs? Do they have good jobs? Are their wages going up? If we look at unemployment data today, we see a couple things. It's pretty mixed data. Number one, a lot of people have jobs. The unemployment rate is somewhere around 4.1, 4.2%, which is a really good number historically speaking. Most people have jobs. We're actually seeing pretty strong wage growth, which is great. Wage growth is higher than the government's number for inflation, so people in real terms are making more money now than they were last year. So that's great. But we're also seeing some less great data. Number one, the labor participation rate, the number of people that are actually looking for jobs and participating in the economy, is decreasing considerably. 700,000 people last month stopped looking for jobs. A lot of them retired.
Can you blame them? No, I'm not going to say it's because of retirement. A lot of people stop looking for jobs because they simply have been applying to like tens of hundreds even of jobs and not even getting a call back. Because we are in an employer market right now, which I do understand, which means employers get to be a little bit more picky with who they want. But the fact that people are online saying that they've applied to 100, 200, 500, even sometimes 1,000 jobs, which I might think is ridiculous, but 1,000 jobs and still not even getting a call back for an interview, you can't blame people for essentially giving up at that point.
Some of them may have given up because they couldn't find the job they want. Some of them may just be taking the summer off, whatever it is. But 700,000 people essentially walking away from the job force last month was a lot. Additionally, what we're seeing is a lot of people who are losing their jobs are having trouble finding new jobs. So this metric called insured employment claims, unemployment.
I can guarantee you it's people are giving up on looking for jobs and they're just taking whatever gig work they can find, whether it's like Uber Eats, Uber, DoorDash, things like that, to try to make ends meet because the job market is just that difficult for them.
Unemployment claims. Basically, people filing for unemployment week after week after week just hit its highest number since 2021. So people that don't have jobs are having trouble finding jobs. So that's the employment piece. The other side of that is consumer spending. So are people spending money? Because that's obviously probably one of the single most important things in the economy. How much money are people spending? Are there as many transactions now as there were last year? Is there as much money and currency flowing through the system as there was last year? And what we find is that consumer spending is actually trailing off a good bit. So from Q4 of last year to Q1 of this year, we saw a decrease in consumer spending of about 60%. It was still positive growth, but it was still more than it was last year.
You're not saying that.
Okay. I would need somebody who is much more experienced with like looking at numbers to kind of explain that to me. Because if you say consumer spending decreased from Q4 to Q1 of the following year, that kind of is common sense to me because I assume people spend more around the holidays than what they do in Q1 because they spend most of that time recovering from what they spent. So I don't know. Maybe someone smarter than me would know if this is logical or not, but to me, that's just basic common sense of the holiday spending.
that if consumers spent some number of trillions of dollars in Q4, they spent 60% less than that. The growth, is it the growth rate?
The growth rate. So yes, when I say that spending decreased by 60%, I'm talking about the growth in spending decreased by 60%. So if you look at Q4 numbers from 2024, we saw spending growth increase 4%. In Q1, we still saw growth in spending, but it was only 1.8%. So that total growth in spending decreased considerably from Q4 to Q1. Additionally, in Q2, first 2 months of Q2, we saw an actual decrease in spending, a contraction in spending, 0.1% in April, 0.9% in May. We did see a decent recovery in June, so things are kind of still a mixed bag.
Well, yeah, because, in June, people start going away, traveling, even though they put that on massive debt too. So, of course, they're going to spend more money in the summer months, going out, traveling. The weather's nice, so you want to experience that. So I'm not shocked by that, but the fact that spending is somewhat increasing during these months that they're mentioning kind of baffles me, because I thought with the way that the economy currently is now in September, that we've probably had these negative numbers for a little bit.
But long story short, we are seeing consumers starting to pull back, starting to spend a lot less than they were. And anytime consumers spend less, that's going to be bad for businesses. It's going to be bad for the economy in general.
But even then, it's consumers are spending more. It's the growth rate is slowing. So we're not actually seeing a contraction in consumer spending yet. Is that correct?
That's correct. And keep in mind, we rely on growth in our economy. We rely on GDP, the total economic output of the country, to go up. If GDP were zero, that would be a bad thing because we have inflation. The price of things is going up. The money supply is increasing. And so we need to keep up with that price increases, those money supply increases through expanded economic output. And so we need to see that growth, and we need to see growth of at least 2 or 3% for the economy to keep up with the money supply inflation and the price inflation. And so when we're only seeing 1.8% spending growth, that's not getting us where we need to be long term.
So real inflation adjusted consumer expenditures may have fallen in Q1, is what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's the consumer side of things. Then there's the business side of things. Businesses typically lead the economy. So when businesses start to suffer, that's a good indication that we may be heading towards economic softening, potentially even a recession. So what are we seeing on the business side of things? Production, manufacturing has been a mixed bag over the last few months, down a little bit, but not to the point where we're overly concerned. One of the big issues that businesses are facing these days is bankruptcies. A lot of businesses are going bankrupt simply because interest rates have been so high for the last few years. Remember, a lot of businesses operate just like we in the real estate world operate on debt. They need to raise money, they need to borrow money in order to continue to grow and expand.
And let me just say this in case anybody doesn't know like how a lot of businesses operate and why they're taking up so much debt. It costs a lot to start up a business. It costs a lot more to even run a business on a day-to-day basis. I work in the real estate field in leasing, and I know more or less because I peek into the budgets just how much my company spends when it comes to acquiring buildings, but also for a lot of the maintenance and upkeep, whether it is paying us who are the on-site staff, paying the maintenance team, the vendors that they hire as third parties for the concierge services, the porter teams, the cleanup crews, any kind of upgrades and remodels that they want to do to apartments. It's an expensive thing. That's why you always see these companies like Airbnb, WeWork, and all of them constantly going through funding rounds of getting new money into the company so they can either keep their operations growing, if not scale up further. And when you have higher interest rates, that becomes harder and harder to do. So now they're trying to find more creative ways of funding, if not stagnating on their growth.
And when the cost of that money is approaching 5, 6, 7, 8% for business debt, it's really hard for businesses to make enough that they can pay that debt and continue to expand. And so high interest rates are starting to take a toll on businesses, and we're starting to see businesses going bankrupt at much higher rates than we have in the past.
What are some notable recent examples of businesses that have gone bankrupt in this way?
I'm not talking about any notable businesses. I'm not talking about companies like Google or Microsoft or NVIDIA.
I'll give you one, Airbnb. Airbnb, because of all of the legislation that has been going on to stop people from buying properties just to put them on Airbnb, or to stop them from renting properties to put them on Airbnb, kind of put them in a high risk position where they couldn't continue to expand the way that they wanted to or that they planned to. Perfect example is here in New York. In New York, you are not allowed to rent out an apartment through Airbnb unless you are currently living in that space. I don't remember the exact law that says that. I have to look it up, but it's basically a general rule here in the city now. And that was to keep people from renting 1, 2, 3 places, or people buying up properties just to list them as vacation homes on Airbnb. So if you want a perfect example of a company that had to be put in bankruptcy because of, current economic situations or even political situations, that's one that you have to think about.
I'm talking about a lot of small businesses. These are mom and pop businesses, the ones that keep the economy going, the ones that keep families employed and food on the table. So when we talk about bankruptcies, again, not talking about necessarily businesses you may have ever heard of, but a lot of smaller businesses are struggling and going bankrupt. Some of that has to do with tariffs. We're seeing import costs increase across certain sectors, and a lot of businesses that rely on foreign manufacturing and imports are struggling the last few months. And so, again, businesses not in a horrible position right now, but we're definitely starting to see some softening from where we were last year.
And that's another thing. If you have a local business in your area, please consider supporting them. I'm someone who worked at a small business back in my early college years. Shout out Sweet Shop. I was a ice cream scooper, candy scooper, and I still check in on them from time to time because with the way the economy's been going, I always want to make sure they're still open and try to support them as much as I can. So this is my way of saying support your small businesses as long as they're doing business properly.
So Ridge is already really good
and we
at
go right
the
to
wallet
commercial
and all the everyday carry stuff, but I was surprised with how much they are.
In 2025, bankruptcy filings are on the rise, reaching the highest level since the Great Recession in some sectors. And in first quarter, we saw 188 companies filing for Chapter 11, the highest number since 2010, according to S&P Global. That's pretty fascinating. And for some reason, I'm not catching that on the news in the same way. Maybe what I'm looking at is this commonly being reported on? Are these headlines all over the place?
I mean, if you're following the economic data, this probably isn't surprising. For me, this has kind of been something that not only have we expected over the last couple of years. Keep in mind, we're in somewhat unprecedented territory with where the economy is today. We haven't had a recession since 2008. We haven't seen the start of a real recession since 2008. We can talk about 2020, kind of that.
And remember when I said we are pretty much overdue for a recession. If we haven't had one since 2008, it's 2025. So we are, 17 years since the last recession? I think they said like the average timeline is about 8 to 10 years between recessions. So kind of overdue for that right now.
Blip that was COVID related, but most people wouldn't consider that to be a true economic recession. And so going on 17 years since the last time we saw the beginning of a recession, that's the longest period of time in history between the beginning of two recessions. Historically, we see recessions every 4, 5, 6 years. And so from purely a timing standpoint.
Never mind. It's actually even sooner than what I thought. 4 to 6 years?
The fact that it's been 17 years since the last real recession tells me that it's not surprising that we're starting to see this slowdown. I expected it years ago, and if it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, I'd be very surprised.
I have a friend who was just visiting recently. He went on Shark Tank for a product that he has made. Apparently in the Shark Tank world, they have their own little community and, their own little Facebook group, and where they just have conversations and discussions about like running a small business. And he said that because of these tariffs, there have been people who are caught up in this where they place a big order from overseas manufacturing, and between the time they place the order and the time that it's coming in, the tariffs click into place, and they're like, well, I can't afford to pay for these product. I just have to stop selling this product because that's my product and I can't get it. I don't have any way to continue on in business. And I think there's a lot of these little stories that, to your point, Scott, aren't getting reported because who cares if that one guy who's selling that one thing goes out of business? Like, how is that affecting the economy? It's not that one guy. It's hundreds of that one guy. It's thousands of that one guy who are selling this little widget and that little widget. And all of a sudden, the jobs that he is creating are no longer there. I'm seeing so many of these tiny little things that if it was a one-off, then, oh, okay, well, that's a little blip. But it's like all these little one-offs that are starting to add up.
I have a couple of observations here. I just don't understand what is currently the drivers of the economy. The things that seem to have been true for the last 100 years seem to be not the case right now, right? In a couple of sectors, right? We're 2 standard deviations above the average for price to earnings multiples in the stock market, right? We're at a 200% stock market valuation to GDP ratio, the Buffett indicator. So expectations for company profits in the economy, on the one hand, are through the roof. And then there's all this fear and uncertainty on the other hand in the anecdotal stuff that we hear from folks. We're seeing bankruptcies on the rise. We're seeing consumer spending growth slow or regress behind inflation. We'll see how that ends up for Q2 here. And it's just not fitting all nicely together. Jay, one thing that we argue about, you'll post something on Facebook, I'll agree with 95% of it and push back on 1 or 2 things here and there. And one of the things that I think is an interesting one here, and I'd love to get your take on this here on the podcast, is the unemployment data. And I've observed that there's an enormous surge from the Great Recession to today, to the 2006, 2007, 2008 period to today, in gig work. Let's extend this concept of gig work to self-employment, small business ownership, and those types of things. We've seen a huge surge, a huge shift in the percentage of people who work as employees at companies to people who work for themselves or as contractors in this gig work economy.
And I'll tell you why. One, it's easy. It's easy to get started with them. I started in gig work with Grubhub, and I want to say way back. Oh, wait. Pinball Game Room. The driver of the economy is tariffs. No federal income taxes prior to 1912 was a fantastic time for the U.S. The only reason taxes came about was to do with Civil War and the Democrats. I agree with you, honestly. And I wish we could get back to a time in the U.S. or just period where we had no federal taxes and everybody just, hey, you have your money, spend it how you wish. Unfortunately, when it comes to taxes, once the government seen like how much they can rake in, especially as population has grown, they just want to keep it there because that's revenue for them. But I wish we could get back to a time where we didn't have federal taxes or state taxes for that matter. Being in New York, I got federal, state, and local here. But I was talking about gig work. I started in with Grubhub way back in the day, and it was there because it was scheduled shifts. They paid really well back in the day, and it was just easy to get signed up. You just sign up, do a background screening, you collect your bag, you go. Uber, same thing. You register your vehicle, you're good to go. Now people have been relying on gig work, especially because it's so much harder to find a job nowadays. So you have so many people that are looking for work, can't find it being a W-2 employee, and now they're resorting to Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub. I don't even know if Postmates is still a thing anymore. And they're relying on these as their sole income at this point. So it's ridiculous. But yeah, Pinball Game Room, I completely agree with your comment about the taxes.
And this has been bugging me for a long time because that's a hallmark of a recession is rising unemployment rates. But if this population that was at the most risk, the gig workers and contractors, are losing their contracts or gig work or finding it harder. They're making less dollars per hour as an Uber driver because there's longer wait times between rides or whatever. That's not going to show up in our unemployment data. These people are not going to be able to file for unemployment. They're not going to get fired. They're just going to lose these income streams that are coming in or see their income decline, and it's not going to show up on those reports. And I think that's a major factor that's impacting the economy right now and will give insulation to employment data for the next several quarters at least. Something huge would have to happen, I feel like, for the official unemployment data to really see a sharp intake like we saw in the Great Recession. I just don't think it can happen in today's economy.
Yeah, and it's actually worse than what you just said. If you look at the data around gig workers, the average gig worker in this country works an average of 6 months before they leave and either leave the job force or go and look for another W-2. And so you have to ask yourself the question, if they're leaving after 6 months, why is that? Did they achieve everything they were looking to achieve? Did they make all the money that they needed? Or were
No, it's simply because they can't make the money that they need through gig work. I'm sorry. People who think that gig workers in 2025 make a good amount of money nowadays is severely mistaken. I haven't done gig work in so long, but back when I did Uber Eats, like my orders would be maybe $5-6 per delivery. And that's not including tip. Maybe with tip, it'll go up to like $8 to $10, but that's because I'm in New York City. Like if you left Manhattan for that matter, and I can imagine other areas, you'd probably be getting anywhere from like $2 to $5 even with tip. So if you want to know why people are leaving after 6 months, it's because they can't make a good amount of money doing this.
They not making enough money in that 6 months that they were able to survive and they had to give it up? If that's the case, and I think logically speaking, we can all agree it's probably the case that
as a former gig worker, I will tell you that is the case.
Workers leave because they're not making enough money to live and to survive, then that 6 months where they are apparently quote unquote employed in their gig work, they're actually not employed, or at least they're very underemployed. And so if we're measuring gig work and we see the number of people that may not be in the traditional job force, but we say we have this many millions of people in gig work, what we don't realize is the vast majority of them, or some large percentage of them, aren't making enough money to actually survive. They just haven't realized it. And if we can look back 6 or 12 months, what we'll realize is that most of the people that were in gig work, that wasn't true employment for them.
I also want to call out, though, another component to this, which is the realtor world, right? Like, how do you describe a realtor? They're not a gig worker. Maybe a lot of agents over the last couple of years, maybe they're making bank in 2020, 2021, maybe.
No, they weren't. I'm gonna call this out as a real estate agent here in New York. When you think about real estate and realtors, the reason there's so many agents in the country is because the barrier to entry to get your real estate license is very low. For instance, all you have to do is you go to a real estate school, which, by the way, you can find on Groupon for like dirt cheap. You study the textbook, you get the school exam done. The school exam will get you through into the state exam. You pass the state exam, and that is it. My first brokerage taught me this. You simply just study everything you can in the textbook. You regurgitate it into the actual exam, and then you forget absolutely everything because you never will use that again. And it is very true if you work in this industry. Now, because I'm assuming they're going to get into the fact that there was a lot of real estate agents who were quote unquote making bank in 2020, and now there is not a lot anymore. The ones who were making bank in 2020 is the very small percentage of agents who do private listings. Now, real estate was crazy. Everybody was buying. It was all cash offers, multiple offers if you were doing sales. Yes, but real estate is a very cyclical kind of industry where a lot of people get into it with the dream that they're going to make all this money, that they're going to be like the next Ryan Serhant, doing $1 million deals. And then they realize just how hard it is to be in this industry, to get leads, to get listings, to get clients to actually follow through. For instance, again, I work in real estate. I work on the leasing side. I work on the landlord side, so I have the apartments, which means I don't have to deal with a lot of the issues that a lot of agents have to deal with. But when I was on the tenant side and I was working on behalf of the tenants and the renters, that part is significantly more difficult to do. And it's pretty much because once you get the tenant, which by the way is ridiculously hard to do, you show them an apartment, you help them through with all the applications, whether it's getting their documents together, filling out the applications, negotiating on their behalf, so on and so forth. Some of these tenants will go as far as to try to go behind your back to sign the lease just so they can avoid paying you the fee. Now, in New York, broker fees are quote unquote illegal. They're not. It's if you hired the broker, you have to pay them. But if you want to know why so many people are leaving this industry, it's simply because it's a lot more difficult than people thought it is. And it's really much dependent on how the economy is. If housing is slowing down, not a lot of people are buying, not a lot of people are selling, not a lot of people are renting, then you're not going to have any opportunities really to make the money that you want to make. Okay, rant over. I'm going to see what they have to say.
The early part of 2022, and then that dried up. We got 1.5 million realtors in this country and what, like 800,000 active listings or something like that?
Yes.
And so it just doesn't compute. So these folks are licensed realtors. They were making money. Maybe they drove Uber or did some TaskRabbit or whatever to try to hold out and see if they could get some business in there. And now they're finally applying for jobs, but that's not hitting any of this data. And so it's masking this story.
Unemployment has historically been a very difficult set of data to get your head around. There's lots of different metrics, lots of different data that in some ways seem contradictory or not necessarily complementary. And even like really smart economists, I'm not going to claim to understand unemployment data very well, but even really smart economists that I've followed have said that it can be really difficult to get a true picture of what's going on in the employment sector simply from the data that's released by the government. And that was 10, 15, 20 years ago when we had a lot more traditional employment and pretty easy to parse data. These days, like you said, with the gig economy and with things changing, people having multiple jobs, it can be very, very difficult to actually get a good understanding of what's going on in the employment market and with the employment data. And so even really smart people kind of disagree what the trajectory is for the labor market right now. Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? Are things staying the same? General consensus is that things aren't getting better. General consensus is that we're either treading water or things are starting to get worse.
One of the things that really prompted me to reach out to you to say, would you come on and talk about this with me, is I saw an article from Unusual Whales. It says, first day of traffic for Amazon Prime Day is down 41%. I mean, people write articles about these are all the things that are on Prime Day, and people talk about Prime Day, and I'm going to wait to buy this on Prime.
I'm not going to lie. When I first heard that in November, that the first day of Prime Day sales actually dropped, that was my inclination, like, okay, 2025 is going to be a little bit harsh on the economy because people love Prime Day. They love to spend money on Amazon. They love to shop. And if you're telling me people's pockets were that tight that they couldn't spend money on Amazon, that's how you know something was off.
Day, and then all of a sudden it's down by 41%. That's a big number.
That gained headlines a week or two ago during Amazon Prime Day, which is actually now 4 days. It went from Amazon Prime Day to Amazon Prime 2 days to now Amazon Prime 4 days.
Down 40%, you got to add another day.
That's actually part of it. With 4 days, there's going to be less urgency from buyers to go out and spend money. So that's number one. Number two, there's some belief that 41% number was generated by one of the big brands on Amazon, who specifically they saw a 41% decrease and kind of extrapolated that decrease across the site. Whereas while we haven't gotten official Amazon data yet, the numbers are actually looking pretty good. But again, it's 4 days instead of 2, so it's hard to tell how much of that was a product of just having extra days to buy versus consumers really wanted to spend versus businesses giving better deals. So it's looking like Amazon Prime Day, that 41%, that hit some headlines, but it's...
I will say, if there was an issue for Prime Day that wasn't economy based, it probably was the fact that there's not a lot of good things on Amazon Prime Day anymore. They used to have like some of the best products like steeply discounted, and that's kind of the problem with Black Friday now as it is. You see like Black Friday deals or Prime Day deals, and the products are just terrible nowadays.
Probably not true, but we don't know what exactly is true yet. Amazon hasn't released any data, and so a lot of it's still just speculation.
We have got to the point where literally anybody can build a fully working app without knowing how to code. This is
Okay, and what about the article, Air Force and Space Force hit 2025 recruiting goals 3 months early? And the bulk of these people coming in are college graduates. And the reason the college graduates go into the military, for the most part, is because they can't find a job.
I read that headline as well. I'm not smart enough to draw any conclusions from that, but certainly if I just went with common sense and logic, I mean, that tells me that there are a lot of people out there that don't believe that their job prospects are particularly good right now and are looking for an alternative path. And so I can't think of any other reason why the military might be more attractive today than it was a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And again, I don't have data to support this, but the logical conclusion is simply that people don't feel like there's as many opportunities elsewhere.
I brought you on for wild conjecture, Jay. Make some stuff up. I don't want to be a fearmonger, but I also want people to realize there's some stuff going on that isn't being reported in all these other numbers like you and Scott were just talking about that should give you pause with regards to, you know, just living a willy-nilly financial life. Don't rage quit your job because your boss made you mad. If you really want to leave your job, make sure you have another one before you jump out. I have a lot of friends right now who are looking for jobs and just can't find them. They're not even getting calls back. And
that should just be common sense nowadays. Like, if you're planning on leaving your job, if you're not happy with where you're working at, don't leave until you have a backup plan that's already in motion. Like, don't leave until you have another job or anything like that. I know too many people that left their jobs because the vibe wasn't right or they didn't get along with their manager, and guess what? Months later, they're still looking.
I don't think they are in these unicorn positions where there's just no jobs available. I think there's jobs available. There's just a lot more people looking than in recent years past.
If you're looking for reasons to be concerned, let me give you another one. And this is something that's starting to get talked about a little bit more recently. Let me start with, I'm not a big truster of government data, not because I think the government's purposely lying to us or that they're bad at their job. I think if anything, the government, they move slowly. And so data collection techniques that might have made sense back in the 80s and 90s, phone surveys and mail surveys, simply don't make sense today. The people that respond to those surveys aren't necessarily a good cross-section of the US. And so the data we get, again, isn't purposefully manipulated by the government, but it's probably not very good data. The last couple months, what we've seen, and this has been by the admission of the government agencies themselves, is that they're starting to change the way that they collect and impute a lot of the data that they're getting. And so a good example of this is a couple days ago, June inflation data came out, and there was a note that I think it was the Wall Street Journal picked up on and called the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the group that puts out the inflation data, and verified that this was true, and they verified that it was true. But basically, the story goes that historically, about 10% of inflation data can be very difficult to generate from true data. The data sources are just too hard to collect, and there's not enough resources at the BLS to go through that data. And so about 10% of the data historically has been what's called imputed, meaning they kind of take information here, information from there, and then somebody who claims to be really smart says, I think the right answer is this, and they put a number into that cell of the spreadsheet, and they hope it doesn't mess up any of the rest of the data that was actually collected in correct ways. Well, that 10% of data that they've had trouble collecting and have been imputing is now up to 35% as of the June inflation report, meaning 35% of the cells in the spreadsheet that were used to generate the inflation data for June were not taken directly from sources that are necessarily reliable, but instead are filtered through some people who kind of make their best guess judgment at what they.
Which is not good, because that means the data could be even worse than what you thought, or it could be better than what you thought. But more importantly, that creates a lot of distrust now in people like us that rely on this data to figure out what's going on.
That data is, and then the whole spreadsheet is tabulated and we get a big number. But when a third or more than a third of the data may be either incorrect or just to be a little conspiracy theorist here, may be manipulated in a way that makes whoever that person wants to look good or bad, it's possible that the data we're getting is not even as good as it was a couple months or a couple years ago, and I would argue that data wasn't great either.
I think that this is where you got to go into tariffs, right? And you say it just doesn't make sense, right? If you're going to impose higher costs on the 25% of goods that are imported in this economy, what percentage of the goods are imported in this economy again, Jay?
It's in the 30s, I believe. I don't have the data.
We got a third of our goods imported here, and there's a substantial tax on those goods that are going to be paid by the importers. How does that not translate in an inflationary capacity to the CPI or the Producers Parity Index, the PPI? How does it not hit those numbers? And I think there's two answers, right? One is bad data, which I wasn't really considering, but the other is a pullback in consumer spending at the highest possible level, where people are buying less of those goods, forcing the producers to lower prices. Those are the only two economic responses to that journey. I guess the third one would be that productivity is so much better. And maybe that's the AI component of this or whatever. Productive capacity got so much better that it's driving those costs down enough to offset any costs imposed by the tariffs. But it's fascinating that that data has not shown up in the official data set. And that really has a lot of red flags going for me. Like, are we really sitting here saying this dude's a genius? Not whatever your opinion is of politics or whatever, but are we really saying that these tariffs are going to come into play and have no impact on inflation, and inflation is beaten, and we should lower rates while we've got these tariffs in place? Like, how does that possibly make sense?
So there is a third option, and it's probably a little too early to discount it, and we may even find that it's the right option. The third option is that those price increases, for the time being at least, are being somewhat or entirely eaten by the retailers, the wholesalers, the retailers, the people that are importing the products, in which case we may not see inflation, we may not see reduced consumer spending, but what we will see is lower profits, smaller margins from these retailers because they are eating the extra costs. And so it'll be very interesting to look at Q2 earnings data. We're just starting to get Q2 earnings data. We haven't gotten.
But there's so many companies that can actually eat those kinds of costs. Like the big companies like your Walmarts and stuff, they can eat those costs pretty easily. But like your small mom and pop shops, the local businesses, they won't be able to do that for long. And if it does continue, then guess what? They shut down, and then we're in a world where the major companies are the ones that control pretty much everything. I think you need a mix of small businesses and big corporations in order to make a country work like this. So, yeah, not a good sign overall.
From any major retailers yet, but it'll be interesting to see companies like Target and Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's to see if their margins or their profits have gone down considerably, which might tell us that they are eating some of these cost increases due to tariffs.
Let's talk about what can go right for a second here in the economy. Well, why don't I start with interest rates, right? We're getting a bunch of headlines about, Trump waving around a letter saying, I'm going to fire Powell. Here it is. Should I send it? Whatever. The guy fires Powell, and immediately you presume interest rates come down because a dovish Fed chair who is going to promise to lower rates will almost certainly be this election. Now, and wouldn't that have a major impact that would offset recession risk?
So keep in mind there's theory, then there's reality, and then I'm going to layer on top of that the real reality. So let's start with the theory. The theory is Trump fires Powell, puts in somebody who was willing to do his bidding, and I say that is sincerely he has said his bidding is he wants to drop interest rates a couple points. And so the minute he were to fire Powell, I don't think he's going to, by the way, because I think he and his advisors know this. The minute he were to fire Powell, we're likely to see the US dollar strength drop just due to loss in confidence in our currency. We're likely to see interest rates, so treasury yields and interest rates spike, because it's a good indication that we're likely to see inflation. When you have lower interest rates, you're going to have higher inflation. Higher inflation leads to higher treasury yields.
I want to push back on that one, right? That doesn't make any sense to me, because I think there's one of two possibilities, right? Either Trump's going to fire Powell, or he's going to just not say, well, all right, we're going to wait it out until he's done. I think it's like September of next year, right? 2026. When we get to next year, this will be our guy. And the market will respond by inverting the yield curve, right? Assuming that the price for U.S. Treasuries will just go down. Sorry, the yield will go down, the price will go up, because people will be expecting the new Fed chair, who will almost certainly be promising to lower rates on day one, to lower those rates at that point in time.
But what happens when you lower rates? You potentially drive inflation. And what does higher inflation mean? Demand for higher yields in bonds. Investors aren't going to buy 10-year bonds at 5% if they think the 10-year inflation rate is going to be 6%. They're going to demand 6%. And so the Fed chair, the Fed, can control the short end of the curve. They can control the overnight rate and the really short end, but they can't necessarily control the 10, the 20, the 30-year rates. But let me step back real quick, because I think this is really important. So I mentioned there's theory versus reality. The theory is that Powell gets kicked out and gets replaced by somebody who's willing to lower rates. And the thought is there's a big shock to the economy. Probably true. I think there would be an immediate shock to the economy, the currency, our treasury yields, our interest rates, all of that. But the reality is that the Fed chair can't unilaterally lower interest rates. There are 12 members of the Fed committee that decides to lower rates or not lower rates, and they take a vote. If the majority doesn't think that rates should be lowered, rates are not going to be lowered. And so the new Fed chair, while they have some implicit power, they don't at the end of the day have enough power to unilaterally decide to lower rates. And so assuming that we don't have 7 members of the Fed committee who are looking to lower rates, it's unlikely we're going to see rates come down just because Powell is replaced. So that's the reality. But here's the reality on top of the reality. Over the next year, we're going to see several members of the FOMC committee, the Fed committee that votes on interest rates, leaving. Their tenure is up. And Trump will be the person that appoints the replacements. So it's very possible that over the next year
If this is true, it's not just very possible, it's very probable that Trump will appoint people who will be very much pro cutting interest rates. So if you've been on the fence and you've been waiting for interest rates to go down, that will be your best opportunity.
People that Trump has already appointed and the people that Trump appoints in the next few months, the majority of people on the FOMC committee could be Trump appointees. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to take the same radical approach towards interest rates. They haven't in the past. The ones that are on there now haven't in the past. But the reality of the reality is that it takes a vote. Trump is going to have some more people on the board that were appointed by him, and he's going to appoint them based on what they're going to do for him. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm not nearly as concerned as kind of the first reactionary idea of Powell's gone, interest rates are coming down 3%. That's not going to happen.
Let's talk about another component of this economy, which is AI. The adoption rate seems to have massively ticked up in the last 12 to 18 months among many people in this economy, many companies in this economy. There is real power to it. I mean, good God, my email is so much more efficient using AI-powered tools, right? Like, we're creating documents, creating images, creating presentations, and all this stuff is just speeding up work that otherwise would have taken me much longer to do today. And so there's a real productivity gain, I think, that's actually being captured by the economy now in a really rising way, even as AI, has been around for a while. I think it's being adopted to boost the productivity of average people in this country.
Let's just keep it a buck. AI is everywhere. And I was told that was going to happen like 2-3 years ago. Now to this point, I chat GPT every little thing I can. My job uses AI for our scheduling for tours. AI is in your emails. If you have Gmail, you have that. YouTube is now implementing its own AI kind of like studio helper to this day. So it's everywhere now. So its effect on the economy will be swift and it will be large. We probably haven't seen a quick adoption to AI technology like this probably since the internet. Like this rapidly, this fast, this large since.
Economy at a much faster and faster rate. Can that just offset all of this and spur on massive growth that really trumps all the other things we discussed?
It could have a couple different effects, and depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. I'm not smart enough to know exactly, but to Mindy's point, I'm happy to throw out some wild conjecture. First, keep in mind who's at risk from AI. My thought is if you do your job by sitting in front of a computer all day, you are at risk from AI.
Oh yeah, I'll give you a couple of industries that may be at risk. Accounting can, data analysis can likely do that. Anything, like he said, anything where you're in front of a computer and anything that might have to do with like numbers, data, anything like that, chances are AI can replace these jobs in the next like 5 to 10 years, if not even sooner.
You stand to have the highest risk, which is very different than all of the technical revolutions we've had in this country, in this world over the last couple hundred years. Typically, when you have a technological revolution, it's the blue collar, the lower on the socioeconomic spectrum workers who are most at risk because they get replaced by productivity. In this case, it very well may be the white collar and the more highly trained folks that are getting replaced by AI.
Which I do want to say, because a lot of people were saying like AI will take over things like truck driving. And on paper, that sounds like it would be a possibility because they would be a lot more efficient. They don't have to be capped on hours. They can just go on, drive forever. But you also got to remember the liability cost for that would be massive. Because if you have an instance where a semi-truck that is being controlled by AI and technology, self-autonomous driving, if that gets into an accident, that company is liable, and that will be a heck of a lawsuit. So blue collar work like that with AI, I don't think will be replaced as much as people believe, but I do believe office work, computer work, data work, anything like that, 100% can happen.
So that's number one. Number two, yes, it could significantly increase productivity, which is good for businesses. Businesses will be able to generate a lot more supply of whatever it is they're creating, whether it's goods or services. On the other side, it could be tremendously bad for workers, because when businesses can perform optimally without necessarily having people sitting at desks, they're not going to hire those people. And so what we might find is that the unemployment rate goes up and productivity goes up. Now, the good thing is when productivity goes up, in theory, prices settle or even go down. We may see deflation because businesses can generate their goods and services with so much less overhead. They don't have to pay as many people. They don't need to have as much office space. Basically, they just need computers. Because they can generate all their goods and services at so much less cost, they may be able to lower prices. So what we might find is we're living in a world where the unemployment rate is high, but the cost of things is low. And so people find ways to supplement their income, gig work or multiple jobs or lower paying jobs that's still sufficient to cover their lifestyle, to put food on their table, to pay their rent. Who are the biggest losers in that world? In reality, it's investors. So real estate investors are going to find that in a deflationary world, in a world where prices are coming down, rents are coming down. And when rents come down, the value of property comes down. When people are making less money, when people don't have to pay as much to live, they're not going to pay as much for real estate. They're not going to pay as much in rent. And so real estate investors could get hurt. Additionally, we could see businesses get hurt. We could see the equity markets get hit. So it'll be good for businesses that their productivity is going up, but when so many people are laid off, potentially we don't have as much money flowing through the economy. People don't have as much money to spend. And so we see earnings drop and we see the stock market drop. Lots of things at play here, but I could imagine in my mind, the world that we live in 5 years has an unemployment rate that has plateaued higher than where it is today, but prices have substantially stopped increasing at the rate that they've been increasing the past couple of years.
Just because I love doing it, I can't resist. I take the same kind of observations and almost reach opposite conclusions to you, Jay, with respect to AI. Because, when you look at the internet, right? It wasn't the established businesses, the established, ExxonMobils of the world that benefited from the much lower cost of doing business and video conferencing and those types of things. It was new players that didn't exist previously. Small companies that started in garages like Google and Amazon, or in a college dorm like Facebook. And I believe that is much more likely of an outcome from this AI race. Think about the proprietary database and algorithms that Meta has created painstakingly over the last several decades. Those are now almost worthless, right? Or they will be in 2 years. They have to stay so far ahead of that, because an AI could rapidly re-engineer that with using a very small cohort of a small community, for example, and really replicate that almost to a better degree. Look at TikTok, right, for example, of how that's working. So I think we're going to see explosions coming out of nowhere from a lot of companies, and we're going to see the ability to compete with the big boys using Grok or ChatGPT or whatever your preference is. They can spit out code that can solve many of these problems at an astonishingly improving rate. And soon it may be as good as some of these engineers at top companies, which would allow me to compete. I have no engineering capability whatsoever, but I might be able to compete with stuff that people were producing 2 years ago at bigger pockets.
I'll give you a small example for that. If you know the creator, Mr. Who's the Boss, he did a video fairly recently on ChatGPT 5 and just showed how much it can do. He had ChatGPT 5 basically create a game of Tetris from scratch in full detail, looking like a modern version of it. And it only took it like 25 minutes for it to happen. So if that can happen coding just a small basic video game like that, imagine what AI can do with just more complex things and how fast it can happen. That's why, like, you're going to see there's a lot more like coming in the future when it comes to AI algorithms, this kind of technology. I wouldn't be surprised if like 3 years from now we're sitting here and everything that we know now becomes obsolete because there's just more advanced versions.
It's highly trained software engineers. So I think that's going to really disrupt things in an interesting way. And that's going to drive costs down dramatically, which I think is going to harm corporate profits to a pretty substantial degree. Because if I'm paying for something online right now, like,
I've been with my partner for 20 years this year. Let me tell you,
relationships
aren't easy, even as a
I'm going to Google less, right? I'm going to type into Google less, and I'm going to type into ChatGPT or Grok more when I've got questions. That's going to be devastating for Google. It's going to be beneficial to these AI providers, but who knows how that's going to exactly play out.
I think we just said the same thing. I think we're pretty much in agreement there that it could be bad for businesses. It could be bad for employment. It could drop prices. For anybody out there that is interested in this idea of upstarts or startups basically coming along and killing large businesses, I think we're going to hear the term innovator's dilemma a lot more in the near future. So there was a book written back in the, I think, late 80s, early 90s called The Innovator's Dilemma by a guy named Clayton Christensen. For anybody in the tech industry, it was kind of a must-read book, but it's all about why large companies that have such a huge technological advantage and head start often fail and often get eaten by startups out of nowhere. And so your example of the browser is a great example. Just the last few days, I've been reading a lot about this idea that Google is probably at risk from some of these small AI startups like OpenAI, who are in theory going to create their own browser and create their own search engine. And in theory, it could be the thing that takes down Google that nobody has been able to take down, obviously, for the last 20, 25 years. And now this startup technology that's been around for a year or two could potentially take down Google at its most profitable business unit.
Okay, unfortunately, I have to close out right now because I got to watch the Buffalo Bills absolutely demolish the Miami Dolphins. But thank you guys so much for watching this. Do me a favor, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Maybe I'll jump back on live later on tonight after the game. But thank you.